As the introduction to his critical examination of the genius and writing of Young, Johnson did Mr. Herbert Croft, then a barrister of Lincoln's Inn, now a clergyman, the honor to adopt a Life of Young written by that gentleman, who was the friend of Dr. Young's son, and wished to vindicate him from some very erroneous remarks to his prejudice. Could have written that clearer, Boswell. Mr. Croft's performance was subjected to the revision of Dr. Johnson, as appears from the following note to Mr. John Nichols, taken from Gentleman's Magazine, Volume 4, page 10. The life of Dr. Young was written by a friend of his son. What is crossed with black is expunged or erased by the author. What is crossed with red is expunged by me. If you find anything more than can be well omitted, I shall not be sorry to see it yet shorter. I think that's actually the final part of the poet section. It has always appeared to me to have a considerable share of merit and to display a pretty successful imitation of Johnson's style. Would I mention this to a very eminent literary character, Burke, he opposed me vehemently, exclaiming, No, it is not a good imitation of Johnson. It has all his pomp without his force. It has all the nodosities of the oak without its strength. This was an image so happy that one might have thought he would have been satisfied with it, but he was not. And setting his mind again to work, he added, with exquisite felicity, It has all the contortions of the Sibyl without the inspiration. Mr. Croft very properly guards us against supposing that Young was a gloomy man, and mentions that his parish was indebted to the good humor of the author of the Night Thoughts for an assembly in a Bowling Green. A letter from a noble foreigner is quoted in which he is said to have been very pleasant in conversation. I guess we're still talking about the poet, so apologize. What's going on? Mr. Langton, who frequently visited him, informs me that there was an air of benevolence in his manner, but that he could obtain from him less information than he had hoped to receive from one who had lived so much in intercourse with the brightest men of what had been called the Augustan age of England, and that he showed a degree of eager curiosity concerning the common occurrences that were then passing, which appeared somewhat remarkable in a man of such intellectual stores, of such an advanced age, and who had retired from life with declared disappointment in his expectation. An instance at once of his pensive turn of mind and his cheerfulness of temper appears in the little story which he himself told to Mr. Langton when they were walking in his garden. Here, said he, I had put a handsome sundial with the inscription Echo fugaces, labenduntur anno, ah me, the fleeting years are slipping by, from Horace's Odes, which, speaking with a smile, was sadly verified, for by the next morning my dial had been carried off. Bruno here says, the late Mr. James Ralph told Lord Macartney that he passed an evening with Dr. Young at Lord Malcolm's, then Mr. Doddington, at Hammersmith. The doctor happening to go out into the garden, Mr. Doddington observed to him on his return that it was a dreadful night, as in truth it was, there being a violent storm of rain and wind. No, sir, replied the doctor, it is a very fine night. The Lord is abroad. It gives me much pleasure to observe that, however Johnson may have casually talked, yet when he sits as an ardent judge zealous to his trust-giving sentence, to quote Pope's Essays and Criticism, upon the excellent works of Young, he allows them the high praise to which they are justly entitled. The universal passion, says he, is indeed a very great performance. His distichs have the weight of solid sentiment, and his points the sharpness of resistless truth. But I was most anxious concerning Johnson's decision upon Night Thoughts, which I esteem as a mass of the grandest and richest poetry that human genius has ever produced. and I was delighted to find his character of that work. Quote, in his Night Thoughts, he has exhibited a very wide display of original poetry, variegated with deep reflections and striking allusions, a wilderness of thought in which the fertility of fancy scatters flowers of every hue and of every odor. This is one of the few poems in which blank verse could not be changed for rhyme, but with disadvantage. And afterwards he says, particular lines are not to be regarded. The power is in the whole, and in the whole there is a magnificence like that ascribed to Chinese plantation, the magnificence of vast extent and endless diversity. But there is in this poem not only all that Johnson so well brings in view, but a power of the pathetic beyond almost any example that I have seen. He who does not feel his nerves shaken and his heart pierced by many passages in this extraordinary work, particularly by that most affecting one, which describes the gradual torments suffered by the contemplation of an object of affectionate attachment, visibly and certainly decaying into dissolution, must be of a hard and obstinate frame. To all the other excellencies of Night Thoughts, let me add the great and peculiar one that they contain not only the noblest sentiments of virtue and contemplations of immortality, but the Christian sacrifice, the divine propitiation, with all the interesting circumstances and consolations to a wounded spirit, solemnly and poetically displayed in such imagery and language as cannot fail to exalt, animate, and soothe the truly pious. No book whatever can be recommended to young persons with better hopes of seasoning their minds with vital religion than Young's Night Thoughts. Now you must forgive me because we do have quite a few more pages of this, or 3 or 4 more pages of the Life of the Poets. I jumped the gun there a little bit. So we have the life of, next section is in the life of Swift, which might be the last one, actually. In the life of Swift, it appears to me that Johnson had a certain degree of prejudice against that extraordinary man, of which I have elsewhere and had occasion to speak. Mr. Thomas Sheridan imputed it to a supposed apprehension in Johnson that Swift had not been sufficiently active in obtaining for him an Irish degree when it was solicited. But of this there was not sufficient evidence. And let me not presume to charge Johnson with injustice because he did not think so highly of the writings of this author, as I have done from my youth upwards. Yet that he had an unfavorable bias is evident, were it only from that passage in which he speaks of Swift's practice of saving as first ridiculous and last detestable, and yet after some examination of circumstances finds himself obliged to own that it will perhaps appear that he only liked one mode of expense better than another, and saved merely that he might have something to give. So I guess Johnson thought Swift was a miser. And it says also page 96, so very early on, I guess, when Johnson was young, I'm assuming. I don't remember this anymore. Swift did not help him get an Irish degree. I don't remember that. I might look it up when I'm done reading, but not right now, because I know if I go to page 96, I won't find what I'm looking for. One observation which Johnson makes in Swift's life should be often inculcated. Quote, it may be justly supposed that there was in his conversation what appears so frequently in his letters, an affectation of familiarity with the great, an ambition of momentary equality sought and enjoyed by the neglect of those ceremonies which custom has established as the barriers between one order of society and another. This transgression of regularity was by himself and his admirers termed greatness of soul, but a great mind disdains to hold anything by courtesy, and therefore never usurps what lawful claimants may take away. He that encroaches on another's dignity puts himself in his power. He is either repelled with helpless indignity or endured by clemency and condescension. All right. Now here's various readings in the life of Swift. Charity. By the way, there was no section like this in the what was that other guy's name? Young. I think because the Young section was mostly written by somebody else. I'm assuming that's why it wasn't included. Various readings in the life of Swift. Charity may be persuaded to think that it might be written by a man of peculiar opinions without ill intention, was changed to Charity may be persuaded to think that it might be written by a man of a peculiar character without ill intentions. Wait, what did I say? So the first one was Charity may be persuaded to think that it might be written by a man of peculiar opinions, and it was changed to man of a peculiar character without ill intention. He did not disown it, was changed to he did not deny it. To whose kindness it is not unlikely that he was indebted for his benefices, was changed to by whose kindness it is not unlikely that he was advanced to his benefices. With this purpose, he had recourse to Mr. Harley. Was changed to for this purpose, he had recourse to Mr. Harley. Some of these are like, why even bother including them? But Sharp, whom he represents as the harmless tool of others' hate, was changed to Sharp, whom he describes as the harmless tool of others' hate. Harley was slow because he was irresolute, was changed to Harley was slow because he was doubtful. When readers were not many, was changed to when we were not yet a nation of readers, a little more pompous. Every man who knew him was changed to he that could say he knew him. Every man of known influence has so many more petitions that every man of known influence has so many more petitions than he can grant that he must necessarily offend more than he can gratify. Let's change to every man of known influences has so many petitions which he cannot grant that he must necessarily offend more than he gratifies. Ecclesiastical preference was changed to ecclesiastical benefices. Swift procured an interview was changed to Swift contrived an interview. As a writer, he has given very different specimens, was changed to in his works he has given very different specimens. On all common occasions, he habitually assumes a style of superiority, was changed to on all common occasions, he habitually affects a style of arrogance. By the omission of those ceremonies, was changed to by the neglect of those ceremonies. So did I say that earlier when I was reading that section? I'm just checking. Yeah, that's what it was changed to over there. Okay. That their merit filled the world and that their merits filled the world and there was no room for more, was changed to that their merits filled the world, or that there was no hope of more. I have not confined myself to the order of the lives in making my few remarks. Indeed, a different order is observed in the original publication in the collection of Johnson's works, and should it be objected that many of my various readings are inconsiderable, those who make the objection will be pleased to consider that such small particulars are intended for those who are nicely critical in composition, to whom they will be an acceptable selection. Spence's anecdotes, which are frequently quoted and referred to in Johnson's Lives of the Poets, are in a manuscript collection made by the Reverend Mr. Joseph Spence, containing a number of particulars concerning eminent men. To each anecdote is marked the name of the person on whose authority it is mentioned. This valuable collection of the property of the Duke of Newcastle, who upon the application of Sir Lucas Pepys was pleased to permit it to be put into the hands of Dr. Johnson, who I am sorry to think made but an awkward return. Great assistance, says he, has been given me by Mr. Spence's collection, of which I consider the communication as a favor worthy of public acknowledgment. But he is not owned to whom he was obliged, so that the acknowledgment is unproportionated to his grace. While the world in general was filled with admiration of Johnson's Lives of the Poets, there were narrow circles in which prejudice and resentment was fostered, and from which attacks of different sorts issued against him. From the disreputable class, I accept an ingenious, though not satisfactory, defense of Hammond, which I did not see till lately, by the favor of its author, my amiable friend, the Reverend Mr. Bevel, who published it without his name. It is a juvenile performance, but elegantly written, with classical enthusiasm of sentiment, and yet with a becoming modesty and great respect for Dr. Johnson. By some violent Whigs he was arraigned of injustice to Milton, by some Cambridge men of depreciating Gray, and is expressing with a dignified freedom what he really thought of George Lord Lyttelton, gave offense to some of the friends of that nobleman, and particularly produced a declaration of war against him from Mrs. Montagu, the ingenious essayist on Shakespeare, between whom and his lordship a commerce of reciprocal compliments had long been carried on. In this war, the smaller powers in alliance with him were of course led to engage, at least on the defensive, and thus I, for one, was excluded from the enjoyment of a feast of reason, such as Mr. Cumberland has described with a keen yet just and delicate pen in his Observer. These minute inconveniences gave not the least disturbance to Johnson. He nobly said, when I talked to him of the feeble though shrill outcry which had been raised, "Sir, I considered myself as entrusted with a certain portion of truth. I have given my opinion sincerely. Let them show where they think me wrong." While my friend is thus contemplated in the splendor derived from his last and perhaps most admirable work, I introduce him with a peculiar propriety at the correspondence of Warren Hastings, a man whose regard reflects dignity even upon Johnson, a man the extent of whose abilities was equal to that of his power, and who, by those who are fortunate enough to know him in private life, is admired for his literature and taste, and beloved for the candor, moderation, and mildness of his character. Were I capable of paying a suitable tribute of admiration to him, I should certainly not withhold it at a moment. It says here, there's a footnote here that says, at a moment, January 1791, I guess when Boswell was writing this, when it is not possible that I should be suspected of being an interested flatterer. But how weak would be my voice after that of the millions whom he governed. His condescending and obliging compliance with my solicitation, I with humble gratitude acknowledge. And while my publishing his letter to me, accompanying the valuable communication, I do eminent honor to my great friend, I shall entirely disregard any invidious suggestions that as I, in some degree, participate in the honor, I have, at the same time, the gratification of my own vanity in view. I think that's one of those times where Boswell is protesting too much. Anyway, I'm not going to start reading those letters today. We'll do that tomorrow. But it's good because we haven't had some letters in a week now. We've been doing that Life of the Poets for a while. So it's good to get back into the letters. I do so love a good, stuffy English 1700s letter. Well, until next time, bye from Boswell.